Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice was a high-caliber art house experience, an exploration of psychosis and trauma that challenged the perception that the essence of a video game has to be fun. It featured combat and puzzles that a lot of people did not find enjoyable, but overall I found it powerful and it left a very strong impression with me. The first game remains divisive, and with developer Ninja Theory now under Xbox ownership, I think it's a fairly bold choice all round to continue to explore Senua's Saga. It's a far cry from the low-risk, high-octane, cookie-cutter blockbuster that the studio could have been saddled with. But here we are with the game in hand. For me, the first challenge was finding Hellblade 2 listed under S in an alphabetized catalogue, but I got there eventually, so this is the Gaming Arcadia review for Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. The first Hellblade introduced us to Senua at her lowest. A woman suffering psychosis in an era of superstition, maligned by her people, and facing intense emotional trauma and loss. Lines between psychosis and reality are blurred, and ultimately she strives to fight her demons and find a way to live on. That doesn't sound like a good time, and it wasn't supposed to be. Ninja Theory worked closely with mental health practitioners and people suffering from various flavors of psychosis in the real world to craft this very serious and intimate story. The subject matter made for a difficult slog, and while I didn't necessarily enjoy it, ultimately I found it very moving. That's a rare thing in this medium, and reason enough for me to hold it in very high esteem despite some shortcomings. Senua's Saga picks up after the conclusion of the first game. Senua is still saddled with her darkness, but she's found her place in the brutality of her world and has a fierce determination to positively affect it. Her lived experiences that we played through in the first game enable her to empathize with other tormented souls, and through that empathy, she may be able to help them overcome their darkness as well. That framing against the first game is important to this review, because it's the core reason that I don't think Hellblade 2 is near as good as its predecessor, despite being objectively better in almost every way. The graphics and motion capture were top of the line the first time the game released, and Ninja Theory are pushing boundaries again with the sequel with incredible tech and direction. It looks utterly gorgeous. Binaural headphone audio that placed voices and sounds all around you was a pioneering and signature feature in the first game, and while the broader industry has closed the gap, the audio is amazing here again. And the gameplay that wasn't so well regarded the first time around, both the puzzles and the combat, have been significantly refined and improved. Not to the extent that people will universally love them, but improved over the first game. Ninja Theory have kept a similar length and intensity to the game, and I'd say that they've improved the pacing as well. They really have outdone themselves in all areas, except that Senua's story isn't so compelling. In the first game, her battles were internalized. Senua was desperate and alone with her psychosis. This time around, a lot of the struggles are external. She's out to save other people besides herself. She's essentially playing a hero, and we've had hero characters in games forever. Don't get me wrong here, this is still a dark, serious and brutal game, and Senua still has some struggles and low points. But on balance, I feel that her psychosis is kind of a superpower that carries her through impossible hardship and mortal danger. The result is that Hellblade 2 hasn't moved me in the same way as the first one did. It hasn't left the same lasting impression, but it carries its own more rounded sets of qualities that should be celebrated. Oh my goodness, this game is gorgeous. It's a showpiece for Unreal Engine 5 as a technology platform, and also features immaculate artistic direction. Environments are sharp, packed with detail, and bathed in realistic light. They're also beautifully curated, with geysers and streams, grassy nooks and mountains, heavy pockets of atmospheric fog, sun glistening off of wet rocks, or full-on rainstorms battering down. No part of the game looks uninteresting. Every now and again the camera does little flyovers of the landscape to move Senua's journey along, and they whisk by without a hitch. The game looks so good I almost want to move there, if not for the regular dismemberments and lack of internet connection. Characters in the game are treated just as well as the environments, with a similar union of tech and talent. Highly detailed, accurately captured actors that fit their roles and environments perfectly. Melina Juergens once again steals the show as Senua, with her mannerisms, both subtle and broad, making this quite unique character so believable and endearing. And there's nobody among the cast, from main characters to screaming clansmen, that stands out in the wrong direction. They're all top quality all around. Ninja Theory have also been very particular with their filmic presentation. I'm the sort that would normally dip straight into a menu to remove film grain and chromatic aberration, things that distort an image in ways that I don't typically like. You can't actually do that in the menus of Hellblade 2, but I'm not even a little bit mad about that. These effects aren't just slapped on haphazardly here, and presentation is paramount to the game. It's a rare case where I'd recommend putting personal preference aside and trusting the intent of the art, because visually, it really does deliver on every level. Actually, that's not strictly true. I'd change just one thing. I'd fill out the screen ratio if I could. The game forces an ultra-wide screen ratio, giving black bars at the top and bottom of a standard TV or monitor. It's not a big problem, but I wouldn't want to see it adopted in other games. I paid for those damn pixels. Audio is also outstanding in all regards. Like the first game, the voices that Senua hears in her head are delivered to the player almost intrusively, swirling around your head in 3D space.
So many voices.
What is this place?
So loud.
What if this fear is worth listening to?
At times, those voices mask a lot of the world audio, but the sounds of rain battering different surfaces, streams trickling over rocks and such, they're all thick and well placed. And when the game calls for intensity, which is often, the deep rumbling chants and cracks of steel and pain hit just right. There's also absolutely no heads-up display or interfacey visualizations to detract from what you see. Overall, I'd say that cinematic presentation has been absolutely paramount to Ninja Theory. Stated intention or otherwise, it seems to be the star that guided development in Hellblade 2. I'd say it's given more importance than gameplay, and even prioritized over the exploration of mental health that defined the first game. The results are pretty incredible, but not without consequence. Mortal Kombat, with a C, punctuates Senua's saga, and it's delivered quite unlike the combat in any other game. Senua engages targets strictly one at a time, with the camera pulled in and whatever chaos in the background well out of focus. You can dodge and parry with perfectly timed parries opening up nasty executions. You can light and heavy slash, and every now and again you can focus to deliver quick fire attacks that dispatch most enemies. There is no HUD and very little in the way of explanation for how things actually work, but overall it's quite exceedingly easy. The dodges and parries both have pretty generous windows, and errors can look nasty as a two-handed axe is smashed into your throat, but they aren't that heavily punished. And even if you do let Senua die, it only sets you back one or two enemies in the sequence. I said just moments ago that the presentation seems to be the guiding star for development, and there is no clearer example of that than the combat. It looks heavy, visceral, desperate and brutal. It's actually basic and easy, at least from a gameplay perspective. From a development perspective, the game is doing a lot to maintain the intensity and fluidity of the presentation. Taking those basic inputs and potentially erratic timings to blend and transition combat so that it looks natural and ferocious is not trivial at all. Combat also throws in little mini scripted events that will transition the fight to a new opponent or see another body thrown into the mix, and usually left in a bad way. Again, great presentation, more so than actual gameplay. The voices in Senua's head have a habit of repeating their canned lines in combat, and they're not really giving any useful cues, so that did wear a bit thin. For me, the simplistic, style-heavy combat works for Hellblade. It isn't necessarily good gameplay, it feels more so that I'm just keeping up with my part in a cinematic, but I think it does fit Hellblade. I would not want to lift this combat system and use it in any other game, but likewise, I don't think I'd want to sub in Kratos or Bayonetta's movesets here. When Senua isn't wedging a cold blade into the hearts and throats of her probably human, probably enemies, she's exploring the vast, inhospitable foreign lands that are realised so beautifully in the game, and pushing the story forwards. I say exploring, the path she walks is actually very linear and extremely narrow. I wouldn't say that it feels claustrophobic, but you aren't able to deviate far from the beaten path. There are two sets of collectibles with voices that expand on the Norse mythology that the game is set against, and it's worth following the narrow path with your head on a swivel to extract a little bit extra, but it really is only a little bit extra. Rune spotting puzzles are back, but few and far between. They aren't the recurring nuisance that frustrated so many people the first time around. There's a few other kinds of puzzles presented as well, and some of the environment shifting tests are well conceived, but always easy. The puzzles never really amount to much more than choosing the correct sequence to activate 2 switches. Senua Saga is quite well paced. The journey never feels rushed despite the short running time, and it never feels uneventful or overstays its welcome. There are no stumbling blocks, no meaningful decisions to be made, no points in the game where I felt challenged or stuck. The gameplay and scenarios presented aren't devoid of variety or danger, but really the only thing that's likely to slow you down are pauses to take in the sights and the game's exceptional photo mode. I think if you try to condense Hellblade II down to the raw gameplay experience, then you'll find something quite underwhelming. Personally, I think that it is a mistake to judge it on those terms. That's just not what Hellblade 2 is. Like judging a dictionary for its storytelling. Yeah, it's a book, but that doesn't mean it's failing to tell you a story. It's a different kind of book, and it's really good at what it does. Hellblade 2 isn't failing to give you gameplay. It's a different kind of experience that's really good at what it does. Saying that, if I do see someone lambasting the game because their measure and expectations were gameplay, then I wouldn't necessarily condemn them for that, especially if they bought the game under the pretense that it was actually a dictionary game. Whatever, you get me. Most of the footage in this review is taken from the PC version of the game, maxed out and fancy. The footage on screen right now is taken from the Xbox Series X, and it's still pretty stunning. There are compromises to be sure. It's a noticeably lower resolution with a softness that takes away some of the fine detail, but it still looks very clean. In some places, the layering of effects and post-processing seems to exaggerate the film grain, and of course it's running at 30 frames per second, but I don't think any of that is hugely detrimental. The environments, characters, lighting and effects are all intact and resolved with enough detail to deliver the same thick atmosphere. Essentially everything that I've said in the review up to this point applies to the console version as well, as far as I'm concerned. I'm obviously not saying that the console matches the best PCs available, but that the exceptional presentation that I have been talking about isn't ruined by the compromises. I haven't looked at the Xbox Series S yet. I'm not doing a full tech analysis here. I do actually want this video to be finished and not really exceeding the runtime of the game. But yeah, Xbox version good. Hellblade 2 launched straight into Game Pass, or you can buy it digitally for 50 monies. It is very linear and quite deliberately paced, so you'd have to be messing about to take more than 10 hours to complete it, and it's not unrealistic to get through the game in more like 6 or 7, even if you're being very thorough and making sure to pick up the collectibles en route. You can then play through again with 2 different sets of narration to offer up some additional depth and other perspectives, but it's still ultimately the same experience, so whether you'll want to do that or not is very much up to you. The other thing that might add value for some people is the game's photo mode. It is at least one of the best photo modes in games, and the game is exceptionally picturesque even before you start playing around with placing your own light sources and such. Ninja Theory have described their own aspirations as a AAA indie before, and they were very upfront about the size and scope of Hellblade 2 ahead of its launch. This is supposed to be a short experience that sticks within a modest scope, packs in meticulous detail, and aims to be at the pinnacle of cinematic presentation. It sits very comfortably at B for the scope element of our rating. So what about execution? I don't directly take issue over the shortcomings in fun, because Ninja Theory clearly weren't aiming for the game to be fun, and I believe that their aim to elicit a different range of feelings is entirely valid for a mature gaming industry. But within that context of evoking thoughts and feelings, Hellblade 2 falls some way short of the benchmark that Ninja Theory themselves set with the first Hellblade. It just didn't resonate with the tiny slither of my heart that gets emotional. So between the absence of fun and feeling, there's a little void that Hellblade 2 doesn't manage to fill. That has to weigh down the rating, though it's fairly difficult to quantify, as feelings are obviously personal and I'm kind of a robot. At the same time, the rating has to recognise the phenomenal heights that the game reaches in visual fidelity, audio, acting and presentation. It's an incredible coming together of both art and technology, and it would be flat out disrespectful not to acknowledge those qualities in the score for execution. So with that in mind, I'm giving an 85. So Senua's Saga, Hellblade 2, gets a B85 on the Gaming Arcadia review scale. That's a strong score considering I'm not particularly sure I liked the game, but I'm awarding it on merit, not my personal taste. Thanks for checking out this review. If you've got your own opinions on Hellblade 2, we'd love to hear them, so stick a comment on the video or come and talk to us in the Gaming Arcadia Discord server. The link is in the video description. See you next time.